Hi, everyone. So nice to meet you and so happy to talk to you all about open source contributing. So I want to encourage you to contribute to open source, and I want you to feel fearless when contributing. So my first open source PR was in 2019, and it never merged, but it still had an enormous effect on me. I didn't know what it would start at the time when I created it, and I never imagined myself becoming a regular open source contributor and certainly not a maintainer. It just sort of happened. PR by PR, I was going through and learning things. I added Twitch clips to 4M, I added the comparison validator to Rails, and before I knew it, I had contributed to all of these projects, and these are just the ones that had merged. Every single time I was taking this small step outside my comfort zone with each PR that I built. And you might wonder, like, why would I bother? Everything is so hard right now. Like, I have a 40-hour-a-week job, 2 kids, the Twitch, YouTube stream every Sunday. Like, why would I do my job for free on top of that? And this is kind of the first idea that I want to correct. Like, our jobs are to build production-ready software that our PO thinks will make the company money. And production-ready, I will admit, is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. A lot of us have 20% time and other things like that. But ultimately, our projects are often assigned, and so are our timelines. But open source contributing isn't like that. It's about the freedom to build without obligation. It's building out of love for your community and without compromises for profits. You're picking your own projects and tech stack. And frankly, for us as women and gender minorities, it is an opportunity to grow our skills and our community outside of our company. I want to get into the tangible benefits for you. So you see your organization's code, a handful of repos, the cumulative knowledge of the people inside your organization. But with open source, you can learn outside of your organization. You can try out a new tech stack, a new architecture, and you can learn new practices without having to swap jobs. If you want to do functional programming, you can see a real production full-scale one. If you want to learn Rust, you can have a real impact instead of building a small tutorial app. If you want to learn Hotwire and see Reaction View in action, you can boot up Ruby events and see the code that Marco writes himself. I want you to make opportunities for yourself to build new things. Oftentimes, as women, as minorities, we're passed over for the shiny Rust engine rewrite. The men on our teams are trusted to do the work, but we have to prove that we're capable. For me, open source is an opportunity to get production-grade experience with stacks and tools so that when the time comes, you have proof that you are the right choice. The next one is meeting incredible people that you wouldn't normally have access to. I meet a lot of people at meetups and events, and I really love talking to people. I find that most of the time, though, it's small talk. How are you enjoying the conference? Any interesting projects lately? And that's nice. I love that. I really love that we started this meeting with how we spent our weekends, but I want the opportunity to get a code review from an expert. I want to have a debate about how to implement things and learn from them. Like we can talk about how many kids we have and what books we've read, or we can talk about whether or not PsychPure or Yerba is the better choice for the Ruby events generators because we have a shared foundation of knowledge to actually discuss. When you're working in open source, the laptops can come out really quick and you can learn from experts instead of befriending them. So this next one is the reason that I really started working in open source. I was interviewing for a new job, and they asked me for a code sample. I looked through my public repos on GitHub, and I saw nothing but tutorial apps and things that I'd play with. They didn't reflect my true skills. More than wanting to pass an interview or show an example of what I'm capable of, what hurt the most was knowing that the best work of my career was locked in someone else's private repos. In open source, I may not own the code that I've written, but I at the very least have access to it. I can reference it. I have a history of accomplishments that is not erased when my time at a company ends. And for us, this is really important because we really do need to prove our capabilities and we need access to our best code. So these first three were all about getting outside your company and out into your community. But this next one is about the right to repair your tools. I don't know about you, but whenever I encounter a bug in a tool, there's this little voice in the back of my head that just screams, if you would just let me at the code, I could fix it myself. And with open source, that's no longer a statement of frustration, but one of empowerment and capability. I want to briefly provide an example of this. So this is a recent PR that I made to Geocoder. So we use Google Street Maps and we use nominatim in Ruby events. And the Google result had a street address method and nominatim did not. So I added it. And this is not a complicated change. It's just 3 lines that are basically copied from Google Street Maps. And this is an easy thing to fix locally. I could check the type of the result and pull those values and join them. Or I could even monkey patch this locally, or I can fix it in the right place. I can fix it for everyone who uses Geocoder. I'm getting a ton of value out of Geocoder, and part of the reason for that is the 383 contributors who fixed and improved it in the past. Open source for me is about collective action. It's about the right to repair, but it's also the responsibility to fix things in the right place. It's about upstreaming our monkey patches and sharing the burden of maintaining a project. I'm trying to convince you, but most people that I talk to already want to contribute to open source, but they don't. Open source is intimidating. It's vulnerable to put your code out in public and have a stranger review it, especially if you don't know if you're going to get a fair review. And it's hard to know where to begin. There's an ocean of projects, and even once you find one, you're onboarding onto a completely new project remotely. I said my journey in open source was a series of small steps, but this first one is really big. I think there are a couple of barriers that lie between someone who is a great engineer in their company and somebody who's a great open source contributor. I think finding an issue, working with forked repos, and the dreaded review cycle are really the 3 big differences between being a good employee and being a good contributor. And we're going to address all of these today, starting with finding an issue. So most people will tell you to find a good first issue. What maintainers do is they often tag good first issues for new contributors to the project. There are several sites that even aggregate these good first issues. And when you're going to get started with open source, this is typically where people direct you. But I think that this is the wrong approach. Dev environment setup is hard. Learning a new code base is hard. And if you're constantly hopping between good first issue and good first issue, then you're constantly repeating these 2 steps. So I think that first you should find a good first repo. So what makes a good first repo is going to be different for every person, but this is the list that I like to use, and I hope that it inspires you to build your own. The first thing I look for is something that catches my interest, a tool I use, a charitable project like Ruby for Good, something that I'm interested in so I have a reason to come back. The next thing I do is I recommend looking at existing PRs. I want you to really get an idea for how active the maintainers are, how long is the review process, what does feedback look like, and it may be helpful to look at both merged PRs and closed PRs for this one. This can really help you set your expectations. I think that a lot of frustration in open source comes from contributors who have different expectations than the maintainers can meet and keep up with. The next thing I look for is a containerized setup. As I said before, dev environment setup is hard. If something is containerized, then I can boot it up much easier and I can discard it when I'm done working on the project. And then for your first open source project, I know I said one of the benefits was getting to work with a new stack, but I think for this first one, you're going to be learning a lot. You're going to be learning about how to interact with maintainers, forking, PR management. I think adding a stack on that might be a bit much. And then the last one is clear issues. This is one of the most important ones. A good first issue is going to be small in scope, well-defined, and reproducible. Reproducible because you need to know if your changes actually fix the issue. Well-defined because you need to know what you're doing. I recommend against picking up any front-end task that doesn't have a mock-up because those often go through multiple review cycles and a lot of feedback. And last, small in scope. Change the color of a button. Add a link. Like you're going to be doing enough to get the dev environment set up. Pick a small one for the first one, and then do the heroic one the second time. This also helps with those expectations, because if something happens in the process, you've only built a small PR and you haven't invested a lot of time and effort into a large one. I want to continue to dig into this because I think that picking the right first issue can help set you up for success. So I want to go over some common issue types I see and the likelihood that they'll be merged. The first one I see is setup changes. A lot of times people will set up their own preferred developer environment setup on a project. One particular example is Dockerizing things that haven't been Dockerized before. I strongly recommend reaching out to the maintainer before you introduce new setup changes. These are some of the most difficult issues to test, because in order for a maintainer to test that the dev setup is correct, they have to tear down their own setup and then rebuild it in order to confirm that it works. There's often no automated testing around it. And then once you've introduced that setup, other contributors will start using it, and the maintainer will be expected to continue to maintain that setup even once you've moved on from the project. This is why if you're interested in introducing a setup change, I strongly recommend opening an issue on the project and making sure that the maintainer thinks it's worth the ongoing maintenance cost. The next difficult one is unrequested refactors. Like if it's requested, feel free. But when you go in and refactor things, your refactor may result in code that's not structured the same way as the rest of the project, which might lead to contributor confusion. The maintainer may not like the results of the refactor because code aesthetics are a very personal choice. But even if the maintainer likes your refactor, it still may go unmerged. You've moved a lot of code. You've made a lot of changes. You've made merge conflicts for other contributors, potentially introduced bugs, and the users have no new features. And this is why unrequested refactors can be some of the most difficult issues to get merged. Let's talk about the next category. So these are going to be ones that are challenging, but also rewarding. So for new features, it's really important that you provide a solid justification for why that feature is important and why it should be added. The maintainer is going to be responsible for any ongoing bugs that come out of it, any additional features that users want because of it. So this can sometimes be more challenging because you have to make a case for it. However, this is also one of the most rewarding experiences in open source software. You want something that the project doesn't have, so you build it, and you are part of the story of that project going forward. It's rewarding, but it's also more challenging. So this next one differs from the rest of them. For the last three, the maintainer is kind of an obstacle to you, but documentation is always welcome from maintainers. It helps users, it helps contributors, it's very low risk. There's very little chance that new documentation will introduce bugs. And this is why it's often recommended to new contributors. But the reason I put it in this category is documenting the undocumented is an inherently challenging task. This is your first time on the project, and trying to go in and figure out from just where the method is called and what it calls, the purpose of that method, and then documenting it in a way that is clear and easy to read for people who've been to that project multiple times. And it's an inherently challenging task, especially for somebody whose first time visiting the project, whose first time it is visiting the project. However, maintainers always want more documentation, so this is welcome, and they are willing to work with you. I just think it's important that we as an industry recognize how challenging this is for somebody who is brand new to the project, especially because it's so frequently recommended in guides to open source. All right, my last category are the easiest and most welcome changes. So first one is going to be existing issues. If there is an existing issue on the project, it may have already been seen by the maintainer. So one of the things that I tend to look for is like a maintainer blessing. Either it was created by the maintainer, they've put a heart on it, they've commented on it, something to indicate that this is something that the maintainer wants, because sometimes contributors will open issues that ultimately get closed. This one is a lot easier and more welcome because you actually have a buddy for this one. You can reach out to the person who opened the issue to get feedback on what you're doing, discuss the solution, and get a first review. You've also got somebody else verifying that this is something that would be beneficial to the project, so they're helping you make the case that this change should belong in the project. So the next one for me is extending. So for me, this is the gold standard for open source. A maintainer builds a pattern for how to build something, and then a contributor comes along and adds another one. So when I added the comparison validator to Rails, I was able to look at other examples of validators, especially the numericality validator, to figure out what an idiomatic way of doing that would be. When I added Twitch embeds to 4M, I could look at the Vimeo and the YouTube ones in order to figure that out. Extending for me is a lot easier to make a case for because you already have examples in the project of where it's happening, and you also have code samples to look at. So this is some of my favorite issues to pick up. The last category is going to be those tagged good first issue. Maintainers literally go through and tag good first issues for you. Those are for you. Flawless, perfect, but these do go really quick. So recently I've been seeing them picked up in less than 24 hours. And I think a lot of that does have to do with the aggregation sites. There's something that I've kind of been referencing in this talk so far about issues that are easier or less or more difficult to get merged. And it's that maintainers really live with the code that you deliver. As a contributor, I skipped happily between projects, dropping off changes. Some of them merged, some of them didn't. But I felt it was free and it was easy and it was fun, and I learned about all sorts of different projects. As a maintainer, though, I am accepting these gifts. I'm accepting that delivered code, and I'm trying to figure out how to make it live in my project. I'm maintaining it afterwards. I'm fixing any bugs that come out of it. I am living with that code for the rest of the lifetime of the project. I feel this duty and responsibility to the success of my projects. And that's why I think that now is a really good time to start talking about the dynamic between maintainers and contributors. So maintainers, they're going to have access to the original repo. They're going to be responsible for merging those PRs. They're going to be responsible for releasing new versions, deploying to production. They're going to kind of set the direction for the project and the patterns that are present. They're really focused on the project's needs. And then on top of that, they do everything a contributor does. As a contributor, you typically only have access to the forked repo. You can create issues, you can create PRs, and you can also review PRs. So keep an eye out for that when you're creating your PRs, that some of the PR reviews will come from contributors. But really, as a contributor, you're able to focus on your personal needs and what you can do and how you interact with the project. As a maintainer, the additional weight is heavy on my shoulders. So you might ask, why would you maintain a project? And from talking to other people, I've really only found that it boils down to like 3 reasons. You want it to exist. You want to share the things that you've built, or you want help building it. All 3 of these boil down to the same root emotion. Maintainers care about their project. And when you make a contribution, you are contributing to the project that they care about. There's a lot of things that complicate this, honestly. There's workload, there's egos, but at the end of the day, this is what underpins open source. Maintainers want you there in part of their project, which is why they've written you a letter. So maintainers have written you a letter inviting you to the project. They've written down all the things that you cannot be expected to know about their code base in a guide for those who want to contribute. Sometimes this is a whole website in the case of Rails and 4M, and sometimes in smaller repos, it'll just be a section in the README. But this is where you find things like the style guidelines, the documentation, how to request review, how to claim an issue, how to run tests, and how to run the developer setup. If you are a maintainer, now might be a good time to look through your contributing.md and make sure that all of these are present in it. One thing that it may or may not include is information about forking the repo, because this is the next step. And I want to kind of slow down here a minute. So in your work projects, what you probably do is you request access, you provide your GitHub username, and then they add you to the organization and you can create branches on the repo. That's way too much overhead for open source. In addition, if you upload inappropriate or copyrighted material to a branch in that repo, the maintainer is partially responsible. So instead, the overriding pattern in open source is using forked repositories. What you're going to do is you're going to go to the original repo, and then you're going to fork or make a copy of that on your personal account. That forked copy is going to be called origin, and that original project is going to be called upstream. On your copy, the origin, you're going to create your branch. You're going to make your changes and run your local environment from there. This is where you're going to get push from, and this is the project that you will get clone. On the upstream project, that is where the PR is created. So you want to make sure that your PR points to the upstream repo. Otherwise, the maintainers are not going to be able to see it. You want to make sure this is where others' changes live, and this is where you're going to be git pulling from and git fetch. What I recommend is running git remote add upstream and then using that upstream URL. And then you can use upstream main the same way you would use origin main in any of your rebase or fetch commands. Now that we're starting to talk about PRs, I want to talk about how to give your PR the best chance for success. So the first thing is that clear description, the why. Why does this belong in the project? Really make a case for it and explain the purpose of what it is you're trying to do. Next, small and single purpose. So if you have a one file change and it passes CI, there's a chance that I can just merge that from my phone. If it's like 2 to 3 files, it's definitely going to wait until my lunch break, and I'm probably going to open up the app on my laptop and check things out. If it's like 30 files or more, then I'll probably review it and merge it around the heat death of the universe. I really want to do it before then, but realistically, 30 plus files means it's going to be reviewed at the heat death of the universe. Next, you want to make sure tests and linting pass. So when I'm reviewing my list of PRs to review, I often check to see which ones are most mergeable. So I'll look for content PRs, but I'll also look for whether or not CI passes, and I do all the PRs where CI passes first. Next, you want to make sure that it's easy to test and reproduce. So explain in your PR how to test this, how to reproduce the issue, and how to make sure that it's fixed. And then the last one is you want to give a quick response to maintainers. So you're going to get comments, you're going to get feedback. And when that happens, you just want to give them the quickest response possible so that it stays on their plate and it can get merged faster. Okay, I just threw a lot of information at you. Let's go through it step by step. First, we're going to find a good repo. Next, we're going to find a small, easy to reproduce issue. We're going to read the contributing.empty. We're going to fork the repo. We're going to clone the forked repo. We're going to set up the dev environment. We're going to reproduce the issue. A lot of these issues are old. They're created by contributors. They're not always the most accurate. They haven't always been vetted, so make sure that you reproduce the issue before you make any changes. The next step is coding, documenting, or translate. So this is the part where I am really confident that you can do this and you can handle this. And for some reason, this is the part people are most nervous about. But you know how to code, you know how to document, you know how to translate things. You've already learned this from your job. And the things that I'm doing in open source are not any different from my day job. I'm learning different technologies, new skills. I'm working with new things, but it is the same code that I write anywhere else. Last, create a PR and point it to the original repo so the maintainers can see it. At this point, you have created a PR! Yay! This is really exciting. Just creating the PR itself is worth the effort. You've learned from this, you've learned more about your tools, you've gained skills, and that is enough. There are a lot of things that are going to happen after this stage, some back and forth with the maintainers, figuring out the review feedback, but what you learned in creating the PR is worth it. You understand your tools and dependencies better now. You have experience with a different code base. And if somebody else has the same issue, they can reference your PR when fixing it. And this is really important because there are a lot of reasons that your PR may go unmerged. And some of them have nothing to do with you or your PR. The maintainer could have 40 other PRs to review, and yours is just at the bottom of the list. They could be on vacation. In April, I went to 2 different conferences, and I can tell you right now that a lot fewer PRs got merged on review events. They may have a big work project. Most maintainers are doing this as a side project and a hobby project in nights and evenings, so work can absolutely affect it. They may have found it hard to read or follow your PR and are trying to figure out what's happening in it. They may be figuring out how to say no. Maintainers care deeply about the contributors in their project. And so saying no is challenging and it's difficult and it kind of hurts. But sometimes there may be future work happening there. It may be the wrong shape. It may be that there's another reason why the PR isn't ready to merge. So, for example, on Ruby events, we have gotten a lot of PRs from people that want to add newsletters, notifications, RSS feeds, ICS endpoints, and we're trying to figure out the right way to build this. We're trying to figure out what the right events are to push out and when to push them. So most of these PRs won't merge, but they have had an impact. They resulted in us building a new feature, the Ruby Events newsletter. Because we saw these PRs, we knew people wanted updates. We knew they wanted updates on the events that were happening. So even though these PRs in particular did not merge, they still had an impact. And it's important to remember that each PR, merged or not, is a little step in your own growth. So for me, my very first PR was Blaze Modstocks. It's a Minecraft wiki, and it just so happened that for the recipe of a tool rack, they had a picture of a cow in a jar. So I submitted a one-line change to replace the cow in a jar with a tool rack, and that never merged. But I did learn about forked repositories, and my first PR was pointed at my own repository, so I learned that one the hard way. Because I had learned about forked repositories and working with them, I felt comfortable in Hacktoberfest working on 4M. As I previously mentioned, I added Twitch clips. They had a Vimeo and a YouTube one, so I was confident I could figure it out. And it turns out that 4M uses liquid tags. So I learned how liquid tags worked. Whether this PR merged or not, I learned how liquid tags worked, which is why when I found out that Jekyll used liquid tags, I felt comfortable building Jekyll Twitch, which is a gem that has a Twitch clip liquid tag, which means now I know how to build a gem. And there's more. So for Hunters Keepers, I needed to Dockerize my app, so I did. For Meet Another Day, I needed to build out dev containers. Now at this point, I've Dockerized and built dev containers for 2 apps. So I felt confident doing it for Ruby events. And I felt confident doing it for lobsters. And then I felt confident talking about it. I ended up giving a talk called Docker and Dev Containers for Rubyists at Tropical on Rails for 700 people. And now I'm an international speaker, which is kind of wild. And the thing is, like, if you're working at a company, only one person gets to build the Docker container and they only get to build one. This sort of experience is only possible to build in open source. More than that, though, I had a project called Meet Another Day about events at conferences. And I learned a lot about maintaining an open source project from that. I worked on Ruby events and I built 13 PRs, and I learned a lot about how Ruby events works, which is why in December, I was invited to join the maintainer team for Ruby events. And now I'm part of a team for a project that had 102 opened and 97 merged PRs in March. All of this together, that also means that I've learned a lot about balancing maintenance with other obligations. All of this together means that I am now somebody who can build gems, who is comfortable with maintaining a large active project and is comfortable speaking internationally. And I ask myself, like, what's the next little step for me? And I don't know at this point. I have no idea what this next little step is. I only know the things that I'm comfortable with and capable now. But I have a question that's a lot more interesting. What is the next little step for you? I want you to open a PR. If you're not comfortable, I can be your first maintainer. You could build with me on Ruby events. I want to find out. I want to find out what you are capable of and where your little steps take you. Thank you all so much. Yay, thank you.